My wife laughed and said, "You'll never leave me. Even if you do, I will make your life hell in court." I just smiled. That night, I emptied my accounts, booked a one-way ticket, and vanished. 48 hours later, she was crying at the airport security desk. It didn't happen during a fight. It wasn't screamed in anger. No, she laughed when she said it, like it was some dark inside joke. "You'll never leave me. And even if you do, I'll make your life hell in court." I remember the way she looked at me, confident, smug, untouchable. To her, I was trapped. She thought marriage was a weapon, and she had the handle. But I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just smiled. Because something inside me clicked in that moment. It wasn't fear. It was freedom quietly waking up. That night, I moved faster than I ever had in my life. Closed accounts. Booked a flight. Packed light. No note, no warning. She woke up 48 hours later to silence. And then chaos. At the airport, she screamed at security, asking if they'd seen me. But I was already gone, beyond her reach, outside her courtroom fantasy. That was the day she realized power built on fear crumbles fast when the person you control simply disappears. And me. I wasn't lost. I was finally free. From the outside, the marriage looked like a dream. Picture-perfect vacations, smiling selfies, anniversary posts filled with poetic captions, and dinner parties where she'd cling to my arm like I was the center of her universe. Friends called us goals. My parents said I was lucky. Strangers online envied the life we presented. But none of them saw the rot underneath the polish. Behind those filtered photos and practiced smiles was a quiet war. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that slowly chokes you. She never yelled. She didn't have to. Her weapons were silence, guilt, and icy condescension. If I forgot to reply to a text within 10 minutes, she'd act distant for hours. If I disagreed with her at dinner, she'd wait until we got home to punish me with cold detachment. She called it moodiness. I called it emotional warfare. I made excuses for her. Told myself she was just passionate, just stressed, just intense. But little by little, I stopped smiling for real. I stopped talking unless spoken to. I stopped existing, except as a prop in the illusion she loved to curate. I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror anymore. And yet, I stayed. Because I thought love meant enduring the storms. I didn't realize I was slowly drowning in one. She used to drop lines like, "You'll never leave me, I'll destroy you in court," with a smirk and a sip of wine, like it was funny. At first, I laughed along, pretending it was just dark humor. But over time, I noticed the tone never changed. The smile stayed, but the eyes? Cold. Focused. Calculating. These weren't jokes, they were warnings dressed in sarcasm. A script she repeated often enough that it stopped sounding like fiction. She'd say things like, "Everything you own is half mine, remember that," or "If you ever think of walking out, I'll take you for everything." And I would nervously chuckle, thinking, is she serious? But deep down I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. She'd mastered the art of making threats sound romantic, like they were twisted proofs of love. "I'd rather ruin you than let you go," she once whispered after an argument. I didn't sleep that night. The scariest part wasn't the words, it was how casual she was about them. Like she had already imagined the courtroom scenes in her head, already rehearsed how she'd smear my name and drain my accounts. She didn't see our marriage as a bond. She saw it as leverage. And I wasn't a husband, I was a hostage with a smile. After that night, after her joke about destroying me in court, I stopped laughing. But I kept smiling. Outwardly, nothing changed. I still kissed her goodnight. Still made her coffee in the morning. Still posed for the selfies she loved posting. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't living anymore. I was preparing. Every time she smirked at me with that dangerous confidence, I noted what account had joint access. I checked whose name was on what lease, what credit cards were linked, what paperwork had loopholes. She thought I was passive. But really, I was studying the walls of my cage, quietly looking for a way out. I started moving in silence. I met with a financial advisor on my lunch breaks. Opened a private account in a bank she didn't know about. Transferred little bits, just enough to avoid suspicion, but enough to matter. I backed up important documents, took photos of receipts, created digital copies of everything that could be used against me later. It wasn't just escape, it was defense. Every time she boasted about what she'd do if I ever tried to leave, I smiled a little more. Because I knew I was building the exit she never saw coming. She thought she had the upper hand. But she had no idea she was hugging a man who had already made peace with disappearing. It was a Tuesday night, unremarkable on the surface. She was scrolling through her phone, smirking at something on Instagram while I sat beside her on the couch, pretending to watch TV. She had no idea that 5 feet away sat a man who had just made the final move in a plan he'd been building for weeks. My accounts were empty. My bags were packed. My flight confirmation was sitting in my email inbox. There was no turning back. When she went to bed early, I waited. I listened for the shift in her breathing, the deep, slow rhythm of sleep. Then, with hands that barely shook, I got up. I grabbed the go-bag I'd hidden in the back of the closet. No big suitcase, nothing flashy. Just essentials. Passport, burner phone, backup drive. I left no note, no explanation, because she didn't deserve one. I walked out of the apartment as quietly as a whisper, shutting the door behind me like closing the final chapter of a long, twisted book. There was no drama, no shouting match, no goodbye. That was the point. By the time she woke up the next morning, I wasn't just gone, I had become a ghost. No trail, no trace. Just an empty closet, a disconnected number, and silence louder than any fight we ever had. 48 hours later, she was standing at the airport security desk, eyes wide, voice shaking, mascara running down her cheeks, not from grief, but from panic. She wasn't crying because I was gone. She was crying because, for the first time, she couldn't control the narrative. She had called everyone, my workplace, my friends, even my mother, trying to find me. But no one had answers. I hadn't told a soul. The only clue she had was a single text I'd sent her right before boarding: "You don't own people. You just lose them when you try." I knew she'd read it over and over, trying to decode it like a puzzle she never thought she'd have to solve. At the airport, she showed them my picture, insisted she had to know if I'd flown out. But policies don't bend for tears. And neither did I. She never expected me to actually leave. She thought her threats, her manipulation, her legal scare tactics would always keep me anchored, miserable, but tethered. But when her anchor vanished, she sank fast. That confident, smug woman who used to laugh at the idea of me walking away, she was gone. In her place stood someone lost, desperate, unraveling in public, because the man she thought she owned had finally escaped, and there was no court in the world that could bring him back. The meltdown didn't just happen in private, it exploded online like wildfire. By the third day of my disappearance, her social media feeds transformed into a digital soap opera. Gone were the flawless couple selfies and curated lifestyle shots. Now it was vague quotes, emotional rants, and carefully framed pictures designed to spark sympathy. "Some people throw away everything just to feel powerful," she posted with a black background and white cursive font. Then came the teary-eyed selfie, captioned, "I just want answers." Her followers flooded the comments with comfort. "Stay strong, Queen. Men are trash. He doesn't deserve you." But behind the screen, the truth was messier than any filter could hide. People started asking questions. "Weren't you the one always bragging about being the boss in the relationship?" someone commented. Another said, "Didn't you once post a story about owning him in court?" Screenshots from our old posts resurfaced. Little inconsistencies she thought would stay buried began unraveling in real time. She tried to control the story. But I had taken the one thing she couldn't twist: my silence. And that silence, it echoed louder than any of her posts. Because the man who used to jump to explain himself was no longer playing her game. They smiled in our wedding photos. Toasted to forever at our engagement party. Cheered us on every time she posted one of those overly romantic captions. But when it all fell apart, when I disappeared and she spiraled online, some of those same friends went strangely quiet. Others, they reached out privately, not to me, but to her. And what they said told me everything I needed to know. One message she received read, "Honestly, I told you this would happen if you kept pushing him." Another friend commented on her vague breakup post, "Actions have consequences. You can't gaslight someone forever and expect them to stay." She deleted that one. Turns out, they had seen the red flags too. Heard her threats. Watched her manipulate. They knew how she spoke about me when I wasn't around. Knew she treated me like a placeholder, not a partner. But they never said anything. Because as long as the pictures looked happy and the dinners were Instagram-worthy, they played along. Now that I was gone, the masks were slipping. I wasn't just escaping a toxic wife, I was walking away from an entire performance, complete with silent co-stars. Their silence back then? It cost me. But their truth now? It was its own kind of justice. While she was busy unraveling online, I was piecing myself back together offline. Quietly, slowly, deliberately. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't double-checking every word I said or bracing for a blow-up. I was breathing, really breathing. I'd relocated to a small town where no one knew my name. Rented a modest apartment. Got a prepaid phone. No social media, no trail. My mornings started with silence and ended with gratitude. I wasn't running anymore. I was healing. Reclaiming my life one peaceful step at a time. I started doing things I'd forgotten I loved. Reading without interruption, cooking without criticism, sleeping without stress. I joined a local gym, even picked up hiking. With every mile I walked, I left behind the man she tried to break, and became the man she never thought I'd dare become. Free. No arguments. No manipulation. No power struggles masked as love. Just space. Clarity. Peace. Sometimes I'd think about what she might be doing. Still posting, still spinning her story, but it no longer mattered. I wasn't living for her reactions anymore. I wasn't her puppet. I wasn't her possession. I was finally just me. And every quiet, calm moment was proof that vanishing wasn't cowardice, it was survival. When the silence didn't break me, she turned to the only weapon she thought she had left, the courts. She filed every petty motion she could think of, abandonment, spousal support, even emotional distress. Her lawyer, likely just as theatrical as she was, painted me as the villain who walked out with no warning, hoping the judge would sympathize. But here's the thing about manipulating a courtroom. It requires facts, not feelings. And the facts weren't in her favor. No children. No shared property. No abuse. Just years of messages, voicemails, and even social media posts that painted her as the controlling, threatening one in the relationship. The one who laughed when she said she'd ruin my life in court. The one who flaunted her power while I quietly endured it. I had receipts. And when my lawyer submitted them, the mood in that courtroom shifted fast. The judge glanced over the documentation and raised an eyebrow. This doesn't look like a case of abandonment. It looks like someone finally left a toxic situation. Her voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. But it was too late. She thought the courts would hand her revenge. Instead, they handed her reality. And I walked out, not just legally free, but fully vindicated. People say I escaped her, like I ran, like I vanished into the night to avoid confrontation. But that's not the truth. The truth is, I freed myself. I didn't run from a fight. I walked away from a cage. From a marriage where love was used as leverage, where threats were passed off as jokes, and where control wore the mask of commitment. I had stayed longer than I should have, hoping something would change. That one day, she'd treat me like a partner, not property. But when she laughed and said, "Even if you leave, I'll make your life hell in court," something inside me finally snapped, or maybe woke up. Freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't some grand, vengeful moment. It was quiet. It was methodical. It was reclaiming my dignity, my sanity, and my future, without a scene, without a scream, and without needing to prove anything to her anymore. Now, I sleep without tension. I live without fear. And I love, not someone else yet, but myself, in a way I never thought possible again. I didn't escape her. I freed the version of me she tried to bury. And in that freedom, I found everything she could never give me: peace.